I had a data company that I founded called Predict Analytics that was about a 4 or 5 year company. And during that time, MoviePass found me and my company because of a lot of the work we'd done for a lot of big television and film companies. So we were working with A&E networks and AMC networks and Screen Vision and lots of these other big companies. And they saw that we had an expertise in really understanding consumer data in the entertainment space. So they needed, as they were growing so rapidly, and by the time I joined them, I was I joined them through my company. So they hired my company and then actually asked me to come in as their chief data officer on an interim basis. And it was fascinating. You know, they had grown from 20,000 subscribers to 3.5 million in less than a year, and now had all this data with 3.5 million subscribers, and needed a strategy on, well, what do we do with this data? How do we not only have data governance, but then how do we ensure we're monetizing the data, and not necessarily monetizing it through selling it, but utilizing it to grow the business model.
Right, right. Yeah, it's fascinating to me because MoviePass feels. I mean, I've joked with some friends like I'd love an Aaron Sorkin script and get a movie made about MoviePass, like we got a Social Network or something like that. It would be an interesting journey. But I was curious from your perspective. You're sitting there with the data. You're looking at information. Like when MoviePass came out, I was sitting there going, this seems too good to be true, and that's kind of everybody's reaction. That's why they gained, as many subscribers as they did in a short period of time. When you first sat down and looked at the company, did you have in your mind these red flags of this is not going to work? This is too good to be true. This isn't going to function. Or was there a path that where that company and that model, $9 a month to go see unlimited movies, could have worked for them?
Yeah, so there was a very solvable path to
Okay.
success, and if I can think back without naming names or individual people, most of the management team were very highly skilled, successful people, and many agreed on the path for success. And I'm pretty sure today, if it had been implemented upon recommendation, and I was one of the recommenders, that MoviePass still would. Well, COVID could have hurt it, but but
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but outside of COVID, it could have had a sustainable business. And the truth is at the time, uh, trying to remember the actual numbers, but the large majority of people that were ever canceling the service would have been happy to pay more money. And many of the people would have been happy to be limited on the number of films they could see in a month.
Right.
Um, the problem is that there wasn't some buy-in from certain levels of management of the difference between growth at all costs versus building a sustainable business model. And there's a lot of underlying issues
Sure.
with any kind of subscription model where you don't control the gross margin.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that kind of the nail in the coffin? You feel like was just the unwillingness to adjust the pricing or put restrictions on the subscription?
I do. I mean, at the end of the day, when a lot of it inspired what we were doing here at Festival Pass is I promised myself I would never build a business where when I asked people to do more of what I originally brought them to the platform to do, that then I would lose money.
Mm,
So the idea in the MoviePass days is, over 70% of the individuals weren't getting value, and about 25% were getting too much value. So it was
right.
really it was a pendulum shift where it was very difficult to keep people happy when most were not getting value, but only the select few were, effectively abusing the system, if you will. But the
Sure.
model shouldn't be in a position where that's allowed.
Right.
And one of the core differences with what we've done, and many companies out there have learned, not many, but a few have learned how to fix that. If I don't know if you're familiar with ClassPass as a company.
Yeah, I looked into
Um,
them a little bit after I'd heard you had compared uh your platform to ClassPass meets Airbnb, and so I had
yeah,
looked a little bit into them. Yeah.
Yeah, and the biggest core there is they had a lot of the same problems MoviePass did for the first 4 years of their existence, 5 years.
Mm,
And the hard part is whenever you have a business model where somebody else owns the inventory and you're a marketplace to share that, the only way to ensure positive gross margin metrics on every transaction, which is what creates a sustainable growing company, is to ensure that you have some level of dynamic pricing for the type of product. And the
Mm,
one thing that really made it hard for MoviePass or any film-driven company is the exhibitors who were providing that inventory, meaning those tickets. They didn't control the pricing. Studios controlled the pricing. So you could, you can go to a movie at noon, at an empty theater, pay $15 in New York City, or you can go Friday night at 8 o'clock and pay $15 in New York City. There's no such thing as dynamic pricing. And, one of the goals out there was to create a dynamic pricing environment. But it was too difficult with the structure that the traditional film kind of business worked. Vastly different in what ClassPass built, vastly different in what we're doing in live events. And the good news is there's a huge opportunity out there to build a sustainable long-term model that is good for the consumer and good for the business.
right, right. What would you say before we move into Festival Pass, and this is adjacent to it, is what would you say are maybe two or three of the top lessons that you would give? I know you've given a couple practical, specifically relating to companies like MoviePass, but for those running subscription companies, period, what would be two or three pieces of advice you'd really encourage them to take to heart?
Yeah, understand the underlying metrics of the cost of goods sold.
Mm,
It's when you have a traditional SaaS company where you have super high margins on software. It's relatively easy to provide different ways to acquire companies and different ways to scale it because the margin's so big, and every additional unit you're delivering doesn't cost you out of pocket as significant. But when you're building a marketplace where somebody else is the owner of that inventory, whether that's a service-based business like an Uber or Lyft or anything else, you just have to know your margins. And as long as you're not subsidizing the product each step of the way, so even in any other kind of subscription company, subscription boxes, whatever it is, as long as you know the unit economics of every transaction, there's opportunity to scale the business.
got it. Got it. So moving into Festival Pass, which you obviously can break down a little bit of what the model is there. You're still in that subscription world a little bit. You're trying to give people access to multiple different events, keeping them at a monthly subscription price. Tell me a little bit about how that came about and kind of what the model is there.
Yeah, so back to the context of my entire kind of entrepreneurial career is I feel that each stage of the career led to the why today,
Mm,
and that's why I think I'm the perfect person to kind of build this company at this time. So going back to after that e-commerce company I mentioned, the next company I built was an experiential marketing company, about a 70-person agency where we would bring big brands to very big events. We helped build film festivals and large music events we'd bring brands to. It made me fall in love with the concept of what it really means to be in a unique experience that only happens once, and that's what live events really are. That
mm,
that whatever that event is, whether it's a food and wine event or a Broadway show or a sporting event, it only happens at that one moment. A little different than things like TV or film that can be watched over and over and over again. It's a different experience. Not to say that seeing a movie in the theater isn't also a unique experience, because that collection of people in the seats will never actually be in that same room again for that same
yeah.
movie. Anyway, that all being said, I really fell in love with live events. Fast forward to having a SaaS-based business, I started really appreciating the concept of recurring revenue, to be able to understand how it makes it easier to predict future outcomes when you have the knowledge of standardized subscription-based revenue. And then moving forward to that, I built Predict Analytics, which was a big data company around entertainment. And it really allowed me to understand how data is so important in being able to build a company to create a recommendation engine that makes the consumer experience much better, but also be able to use data to predict outcomes.
Mm,
So when I look at the experiential side of understanding events, the recurring business model, and then understanding how data drives it all. And then obviously having the experience at MoviePass gave me a very good perspective on what to do and what not to do in a
right.
subscription entertainment product. That all led me to what we're building today. And I can go on and on.
Yeah.
It's a huge global opportunity. There's a $200 billion market, so it's even 20x the size of the film market.